Hi, this is Eileen, owner of Just Lookin Gallery. I'm here today with renowned artist Dane Tilghman, and we're going to talk a little bit about his past and his art. Dane, I truly believe that artists are born, not not made. So how old were you when you truly just started drawing all over everything?
Well, that's a good question. I was about 4 years old when I started drawing, simply because my older brother liked to draw, who was a year and a half older than me. So I just drew what he liked to draw, and then when he went to elementary school, I was on my own, so I kept doing it. I wasn't as motivated as I was until I got to kindergarten, and I found other artists, other people who liked to draw. So I just hung out with those individuals simply because they could draw something different than I could draw, and I did that throughout elementary school, and continued that process in the junior high. And then when I got to high school, then I started to blossom and focus on particular things like drawing and painting.
At what point did you realize that being an artist might be a viable career?
Well, you know what? I actually believed when I was in high school that I could possibly be an artist. But first things first, I needed to get into college, to really hone my skills. And I went for graphic arts as a major, simply because my advisor at the time says, you really can't make a living as a fine artist. Starving artist was a big word back then, and he was being, practical, and says, okay, get a degree in graphic arts. But even after I got that degree, I didn't really know how to transition from being a working artist or a working person to my own business. It took 6 years from that point after the degree before I decided it was full time to go. But I didn't really know how to make that transition. It was no magical thing.
Do you feel that your background in graphic arts crept into your fine art? Does it continue to creep in?
Yeah, definitely, because first of all, I knew production processes. When I became a fine artist, it was in the 80s, and offset lithograph reproductions were very big. So I knew the process. So I would go to the printers and watch them, make the color separations, actually do the plates and all of that, 4-color process. So yes, that actually was a good thing. Plus, it helped me create my own tear sheets and brochures and things.
How do you pick your mediums?
Well, I started with black and white pencil drawings was my very first medium, simply because I was working from black and white photography. And I got really good at doing pencil drawings. I mean, there were a lot of detail in those particular drawings. So that's how I began. And then I branched out to watercolor as my second medium, simply because I realized people like color a lot more than they do pencil. You had a broader audience.
Now, I've known you 30 years. I don't think I've ever seen one of your pencil pieces.
Yeah. Well, I did all of that stuff when I was probably in my early 20s, probably right up to maybe 30. And I did a lot of pencil drawings.
Do you still have any of them?
I got a handful of them, but most of the originals are gone. I mean, it just took so long to do pencil drawings. I was putting in about 125 hours on a pencil drawing, and the market wasn't that huge. So that was one of the reasons I had to go with a full color, going watercolor.
Now, you do a lot of people. You portray a lot of people in your pieces. And that's been fairly consistent the 30 years I've been seeing your work. How do you pick subjects? How do you pick them? Does the medium tell you the subject, how you're going to handle a certain subject, or does the character of the person tell you what medium you're going to use?
Yeah, the character of the person, the character of the photograph, the soul of the photograph is very important to me. So I will take a photograph and I will sit with it for a while. And then I'll start to pick it apart from a technical standpoint, looking at the grayscale, the darks, the lights, the feeling, how the light is coming in, and then that will determine, what medium I'm going to work with. In this day and age, I'm working more in acrylic, and I've added impressionism into the equation too. So when I'm looking at a photograph, I'm looking at it
So you feel
differently.
you went from realism to impressionism?
I went from realism to my elongated style, which I call tall tale art. Then I incorporated cubism, into the, the mix. And then Impressionism was the last one I incorporated into the mix. So I never left any of those. I just added.
What events in real life inspired your paintings?
Oh, that's a hard question because most of the photographs I'm working from are people who have passed on. Nostalgia. Now, all right, I would say this. Events in terms of real life, being a full-time artist, I still had a family to support. So there was the everyday pressures of, being the breadwinner, quote unquote, for that family. So I was a workaholic, really. I probably was doing about maybe 300 pieces a year, and taking them to the marketplace. So the motivation truly was financial survival.
So you pretty much get into your studio every day?
Not as much as I used to. In the early days, definitely. I was in the studio every day, and depending on the size of the painting, I could do 2 or 3 small pieces, or maybe 1 or 2 pieces a week, depending on the size of the painting. Then I would take it directly to the marketplace, whether it was a gallery or, to a publisher, and, if it had broad appeal.
If you could paint in any size, would you go smaller or larger?
Oh, man. That's a good question. It really comes down to the inspiration at the time. When you look at certain photographs, since I'm working from photographs, some photographs say they need to be big. In other images, say, okay, you can paint me any size that makes sense to you at the time. So, I really, in the early days, I was doing medium-sized pieces, 22 by 30-inch watercolor sheets or half sheets of watercolor. And then when I finally got to canvas, it gave me all kinds of options. I was doing pieces 6 feet by 7 feet, because I knew I wanted to express myself at that size, because it just felt right at the time, and then I would worry about how I'm going to make money off of those pieces.
Now, when I met you, you were doing a lot of pieces of sports art.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because you loved sports? Was it just what was happening in the marketplace at the time?
Well, I'll say, for instance, with the black golfers, I was one of the first artists, if not the first artist, to start painting black golfers. And it basically came from somebody who says, why don't you try painting black golfers? And that's like, okay, that's a market that nobody's participating in. So I was one of the first, and then Alonzo Adams came along, and he was probably the next one. He probably got more exposure. And of course, I always hassled him and says, look, I was the first one to do that. And then we had the Negro Leagues, which was, all of these things, especially the Negro Leagues, was about the people, about knowing who these individuals were, knowing that they were superstars, but they weren't getting the recognition, certainly from an artistic standpoint.
Now, you've talked about working mostly from black and white photographs.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're doing that, how do you pick your color palette?
It comes from the head and the heart, really. I'll look at a photograph, and again, I'll break down the gray tones, the gray scales, and what feels right. But knowing looking at pieces from an impressionistic palette, I love impressionism, so I would look at pieces using that, that particular mindset.
So that mutes your colors a certain amount?
Does it what?
Mute your colors, make them softer?
Yeah, it does, and it you create. One thing about impressionism is the things that are closest to you are always darker, and the things that are further away are always lighter. So you're still creating a 3-dimensional feeling, but definitely it helps me to become more attached to the photograph, knowing that I have a lot of options in terms of color and direction and that sort of thing, and creating a feeling.
One of the things I love when people come in the gallery and view your work is they truly feel like they know the people in your paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel the same way about the people that you're representing in your work?
Yeah, I do. I will sit with a photograph until I connect to that photograph spiritually. I want to know that person that I'm painting, and then I want to honor that individual that I'm painting. Most of the photographs that I work from are just everyday people. But my thing is this: these people lived They made a mark, in life. They were important to somebody. Okay, they weren't famous or anything like that, but they were famous to somebody.
When you were moving from watercolor into more acrylics, so you're going from a somewhat flat medium to a medium that obviously you can use a lot more texture in.
Right.
When did you start adding the extra texture beyond just what the paint itself would give you?
Well, probably when I first started doing acrylics, which was in 2000, was the beginning of my palette knife life, I should say. That's when I picked up that particular tool because texture was very important. For me, that was the next transition because I knew people love color, but they love texture even more. Color and texture, that combination, that way, because one of the things that I had to deal with when working with a flat mediums is some people didn't know whether it was the original or a reproduction. And sometimes I even got in discussions with people, oh, that's a reproduction. No, that's the original. So I took that part out of the equation by bringing in the texture. And the more I worked with that palette knife, the more proficient I got with it.
Have you ever dabbled in oil paint?
Yeah, I dabbled in oil paints, but at the time when I was a young artist, you used a lot of turpentine, to thin out things, and I never liked the smell of turpentine. And I also didn't like the factor that it took a long time to dry. I was kind of impatient. I wanted to get to the next spot quickly, and that was one of the things that acrylic did for me.
So how do you pick your backgrounds? I mean, I know some of them are city scenes, some are more country. But how do you pick what and how much you're going to represent in the background? Does that come from the photographs?
Well, yeah, I mean, the photographs, say if it's a city scene, I have to reduce the elements in that, when I'm painting, I got all these different things that I could look at, and again, I'm thinking about what feels right at the time. If I'm painting the person, that means I have to reduce all the elements in the background because they're not as important as that individual, which is, the thing I want people to focus on.
If you can talk about just two of your artists that truly inspired you, who would the top two be?
Oh, Hugh Lee Smith would be one for sure because of the way he used light. Daniel Garber would be another. He was from the Delaware River School of Art. Again, the way that he used light. In terms of black artists, definitely Jacob Lawrence. For sure, for his graphic, the way he depict, graphic, very simple graphic colors, but strong, but always told a story, just to name a few.
So you very much consider yourself a visual storyteller?
Yeah. Another one would be Henry O. Tanner, for sure, for his post-impressionistic style.
I've seen so much of your work over the years, but until today, I had never seen any of your abstracts. What inspired those?
Well, it's just for me the next thing. After going into the elongated style, each style I worked in, from the realism to the elongated style, was about 5-year period. And then, like a lot of artists, we get curious. What can I add to the mix to get the blood flowing, to get the excitement back in? So every 5 years, I was adding a new style. So probably 15 years into the game came the Cubist style, the graphic style, and that sort of thing. That was the next thing for me. So that's, so it was out of curiosity and being almost bored with what I was doing. I needed something to get me excited again.